Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. I am really, really excited to have Rex Miller on the show today. Welcome to the show, Rex.
Thank you, Ruth. It's great to be here.
So Rex and I got connected through LinkedIn a couple of months ago, actually, and I was really inspired by the story that you had shared on LinkedIn following the Amen Clinic's interview they did with Rachel Hollis with regards to her brain imaging scan. So I'm really interested in diving into your story and your family's journey that they've been on in terms of optimizing their unique brains. But before we start, could you just introduce yourself to everyone? I know you've got just a breadth of experience in this space, particularly from a corporate perspective, and also what you're really passionate about right now.
Well, I started as a project manager for Southwestern Bell. It's now AT&T in 1977. So it's been a while. But what I was working on there is reconfiguring corporate space from private offices to cubicles. It was a new thing. Mm-hmm. But that also meant changing culture. So that became a fascination about behavior and resistance, and it became an area of focus. Over time, I built up kind of a resume of understanding corporate dynamics and culture, looking at engagement. You know, Gallup's done research on engagement for a long time. So it's evolved into project work, an engaged project team.
Yeah.
It's evolved into education, engaged students and teachers. But that began to morph about 5 years ago into looking at some underlying causes of engagement, and that's well-being. So for the last 6 years or so, there's been a big focus on the role of well-being in how we show up every day. And that, of course, as you know, Ruth, that led to kind of a little bit of an autobiography of looking at my own family's health and well-being and unpacking that.
Yeah. And, I think it's really interesting that, you kind of almost fell into the importance of well-being, but it's often put as the last thought on the agenda when people are doing transformations rather than the first thought. And the fact is that brains run organizations that, they run the world ultimately, that, and it's really important that we take the time to look at how can we optimize the brains of the people in the workplace. And there's so many facets to doing that. And obviously well-being is a really important part, because that's looking at the whole person and how do you optimize a person's well-being. So I know we're going to dive into your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'd love to know for you, what does optimal brain health mean for you personally in the context of your experience?
Well, so I look at optimal brain health as a byproduct of how I'm living. So it's the food I eat, it's the exercise, it's the social connections. Are they functional? It's sleep. I mean, so much of it is sleep. I've really focused a lot since 2016 on the quality of sleep. And so it's all those pieces come together so that I can feel good, perform at my best. And I really have shifted from looking at managing energy more than managing time, and really being aware of when and how I'm at my best and when I need to recover. Recovery has been a big part of this. Sports science has been really surfacing the need and the role of recovery. I mean, look at some of the kind of the senior citizens in sports: Roger Federer, Tom Brady, Justin Verlander, and they've had kind of a second career because they discovered the role of sleep and recovery. So for me, it's the energy is kind of my main metric for brain health.
Yeah. I think that's so important, and people don't really talk about it from an energy perspective. And when I had a really, deep, dark place for me, it was energy that was the first thing I really needed to focus on to get my life back and to get my brain health back. And it's really everything. But I love the fact that you talked about time as well, because it's a kind of like this energy time continuum, isn't there? And
Yeah.
you can't have one without having some conflict with the other, or vice versa. Is we need to look at both,
Right.
to work out how can we get the best out of ourselves, how can we perform at our best. And I also love the fact that you talked about, really, you covered the 5 pillars of brain health that I talk about from the framework that we have, is how am I feeling, which is the first pillar, feelings, and it's remembered by the mnemonic facts. Our actions, which is really how we're really performing. Our connections to ourselves and others, our thoughts, and also our surroundings. I know you've done that, in terms of the work you've done in your book, Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, and all the other books that you've written about. But I'd really like to dive into the story that you shared on LinkedIn, if you will. But if you wish to go back a bit further than that,
Sure.
that kind of
Yeah.
what led you to that change in your family's brain health, that would be great.
So I had finished the work, Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, in maybe 2014 or so. And then I was approached by a company that does education and said, would you do an education version and do the research around that? Reluctantly, because I'm not an educator.
Yeah.
We went after it, and it was the most life-changing research we did.
Wow.
And through that, I recognized how the education system damaged my kids. And what we discovered in the research, and Sir Ken Robinson was one of the individuals that I've met with when he was still alive, and he spurred a lot of this research, is that this industrialized version of education really squelches the unique individuality of people. And in my particular case, I had a couple of what I call one-offs. So in the book, Humanizing the Education Machine, I said, the system's not geared towards one-offs, and it's geared towards batched kids. My daughter, who is on the autism spectrum, high functioning, she was one of the casualties of the system. And so part of the research that we were uncovering is the amount of trauma in education, the kids that come to school with trauma, and it's called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Yeah. And there's a score. So as we were diving into this trauma thing, and then I was looking at what my daughter experienced in high school and how severely she was bullied, the next piece to the puzzle that came together was Besser van der Kolk's book called The Body Keeps Score. And seeing that trauma, and as Dr. Gasco, one of the colleagues we worked with, he said, the issues are in the tissues. In other words, the trauma gets stuck in the body. And
I agree with you, like 100% here. It does.
And I didn't realize that just therapy alone doesn't do it, that you have to do what he calls body work, whether it's yoga or Pilates. And what I started understanding is that there's a deep discontinuity or dysregulation between what the brain is interpreting and what the body is feeling. And one of the things that movement does is it resynchronizes those. I didn't realize that. But one of the things that came up a year after we discovered that my daughter had been traumatized, brutally bullied, and not physically sexually molested, but verbally sexually molested. And an autistic brain takes things so literally that she could not process. And so it went into her tissues. Within a year, she started experiencing optic neuritis.
Wow.
And I can still remember the call, and it's in the book whole. I retell the story. And so we were able to get her to an infusion facility for steroids. So it recovered. The doctor said at the time, he said, it's probably a one-off, but it's a precursor for MS. Yeah. Well, 5 years later, 7 experiences more, they re-examined her and said she had MS. I didn't believe it because of the research I was doing, but I had no way to prove it. So the Amen Clinic came up, and I
How
said,
did that come up for you?
well, I met Dr. Amen at a wellness conference.
Oh, okay.
And
That's what happened with me.
and it was the WellCoa conference in San Diego, and I was
Okay.
rolling out our research on the healthy workplace nudge. And I was invited, but basically my pitch was wellness programs don't work. I didn't want to say you're wasting your time, but that was my pitch at a wellness conference where everybody, that was their job. And so what I discovered is so many people came up and said, oh, finally somebody said we're so frustrated because we can't get people to sign up. So in that, I met Dr. Amen, and he was interested in our research. And I knew of the clinic. I knew the work they did. And so I decided for spring break, we would plan a family vacation. And in order to sell it to the kids, because my son likes California, my oldest son likes Santa Monica, my youngest son likes the Getty Museum.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, by the way, we'll all get brain scanned while we go to California. And so it was a little bit of, okay, that's kind of odd, Dad. Why would we do that? And so
it's a very funny. I'm loving this because I actually went to the clinic myself in California, tagging it onto recertifying as a high performance coach.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a very similar story.
So we had other reasons too. All three of
Sure.
my kids are adopted, and we know that there can be some trauma in adoption. I've got a son with high level ADD. My mother had Alzheimer's before she passed away. My wife's father has dementia. So there were lots of reasons for us to just kind of unravel and just see, okay, where do we stand? And it was fascinating. And sure enough, Michelle had the trauma pattern, that diamond pattern, the ring of fire
pattern, PTSD.
And my oldest son, had the same pattern as well. And there's his story. We could talk about his story. So that gave me some fuel to really fight this diagnosis of MS. But my daughter was kind of certain she had it. When she got married, she needed a physical for her insurance. And I said, take your brain scans in and see what they say. Well, she took them in, and they looked at it, and they re-examined her, and they said, you don't have MS. We don't know what you have. Of course, you and I know what she's experiencing. It's the body's reaction to trauma that takes different forms of autoimmune.
Absolutely. It can be different for everyone.
And she's been off the gabapentin and the medication for MS for 5 years with no problems at all. So I'm convinced. And after that, and after having spoken to so many people, when somebody talks to me that is expressing some, they're having weird physical autoimmune issues that they can't get their arms around, I will just ask us, I'll say, what was your childhood like? Was there anything in childhood that you experienced? And Ruth, I'll tell you, every single person that has been struggling with this, I can't get my arms around this, and I feel lousy, and I don't know what to do about it, and counseling's not helping, and whatever, they all have a story that traces back to some form of trauma.
And often in their childhood, where it manifests and the seed takes root, and then the tree grows really strong, because the earlier the seed roots, the stronger your tree can become if you layer the trauma. So I think it's a huge issue that is often overlooked in the medical field. Adverse childhood experiences, and there's kind of this expectation that it has to be I've had clients who really downplay the trauma they've actually experienced, because they compare their situation to somebody else's who they've read about in the news, who has had it much worse than them. And so they
Yeah.
kind of think, well, I need to keep calm and carry on. It's, it shouldn't be so bad. And so that negative self-talk, like I should be all right, I should be all right, the ants start coming into play, automatic negative thoughts. And it doesn't help your system because your system's already really wired,
Right.
with massive doses of cortisol. Your adrenal glands are working overtime. Your hyperpituitary axis is, all fired up and lit up, with all of these chemicals running around your body, and your body can't handle it and starts shutting down in whatever way it can to deal with the overload.
Yeah.
And it's a huge problem.
And I think it's a particular issue now, 2 years into a global mass disaster.
Absolutely.
So what shifted, it's interesting timing, I have a firm belief that I was put on this planet for a purpose and things happen in the timing. So the book that we wrote on teacher mental health and well-being came out March of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does. It's got Michelle's story in there. It talks about trauma. But then I started seeing it play out on a global scale. And I work with a colleague of Dr. Amen. His name's Dr. Jernigan. Does similar brain scans. And so he was explaining that there's 3 kinds of trauma. There's trauma 1, which is the one you were just talking about. We kind of downplay because we didn't see somebody shot, or we weren't a first responder, or we weren't in the military.
Mm-hmm.
But and the kinds that teachers oftentimes experience is a level 3, which is vicarious trauma, where they feel the pain of somebody else that they can't help. And so it builds up over time as a help.
They have no barrier between what the person is expressing and what they're experiencing, what they're absorbing.
And so what we've gone through is a different kind, but it still wires the brain the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And a level 2 is a prolonged period of time
Mm-hmm.
of stress or deprivation, like wartime conditions or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point in time, your brain says, this isn't going to change. So I'm going to change my brain to be protective all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it doesn't show up dramatically, it's still trauma. And it needs release.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been kind of the interesting window. And that's really been the focus, Ruth, that I've had here, is trying to help organizations better appreciate what people have gone through this global mass disaster. To be ready for the triggering effects of it, to see that it's probably in the 25 to 30% range of your workforce. And, being forewarned, hopefully, is being forearmed, but we're still ignoring it and we're still not dealing with it.
Well, I think everybody feels that we're all in, I like to think of it, we're all in a storm. We're all in the same storm. Some of us are, further forward in the storm, some of us at the rear of the storm. You could think of it as a hurricane, if you like, or a tornado, but we're all in different boats. So, some of us can steer our ship because it's quite big and it's quite sturdy, and we've got a really long, experience behind us to know how to steady our ship. And we've got all of the, the mechanical systems and tools to allow us to steady it, whereas other people are, in a rowing boat, with no stabilizers, with a whole family packed in it. Trying to ride the waves, and it's a real problem because we can't just look at the storm. We have to look at the individual circumstances, not just in the storm, but the leading up to the storm, in terms of, are they equipped to, navigate the storm? Have they got the right tools? Have they got the right kit? Have they got the right life jackets and, navigation devices to get them through? And many people don't.
Well, and I think that insight, Ruth, that it's very individual. So to play the metaphor like a tornado or hurricane, that's a common experience, but it lasts a week or two and then you go into recovery. one of the differences here is not only is everybody's storm is a little bit different. I may have lost a parent. I may not be able to see somebody. I may be locked in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 kids, whatever it is. So you've got all that uniqueness, but it's gone on for 2 years.
Exactly. So it's layered for,
and we're not
700
designed to go through it for 2 years. We're designed to rally quickly after the hit, but to do, and I bet you've seen, just like I have, that the rise of hope, when the first round, we've got the vaccine coming, springtime's coming, and then boom, Delta virus hits. And then we're getting through, and then Omicron hits, and you just see the crater.
And also on that front, the hits of the change, the variants came out in Christmas time. So we had the variant last year, pretty much the same time as we had the variant this year, and also the variant the year before, because now we're into the sort of 3rd year, aren't we? Yeah. So it's always hit around Christmas time. And that's when people's immune systems are at their lowest, because often their vitamin D levels are at their lowest. Their food consumption is at its worst because they're eating junk food because it's Christmas time.
Right.
They've stacked the stress in the run up to Christmas in the hope that they're going to get some time off, because that's what typically happens. People cram. It's like cramming for an exam. It's cramming for Christmas break or festive break, depending on what your religious outlook is, and people are not in a great place because of that, from a brain health perspective. And then as soon as we have all of this knock-on media that fuels the fire or heightens the storm and throws a whole heap of more waves into play, the boats start rocking and some people capsize.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've seen it. So a big shift in my business was I used to travel and do events. It was either a workshop or it was a conference keynote or something like that. So I never really kind of saw the long term, but through the last 2 years, it's shifted to coaching. So I'm watching people go through this, and I'm seeing exactly what you're saying is, that roller coaster, and each time they hit a little bit of a downturn, it's a little harder for them, and their ability to bounce back is harder. So, we're in a very unique time, and brain health. I mean, I didn't realize it, but it makes so much sense. You can't you can't manage and you can't improve something that you can't see. And so if you can't see what's going on in the brain, how are you going to improve it?
Yeah. And if you don't understand as well, in terms of what you are seeing,
right.
And also even the symptoms, that people within the traditional, and you've experienced this obviously at a personal level, but traditional medicine focuses on treating the symptom. It's very much a symptom based approach rather than doing root cause analysis. So it doesn't tend to go, okay, that's a bit interesting. You've got this symptom, but let's have a look at your history. Let's dive into the detail to understand, okay, you're in this storm. How did you get into this storm in the first place? What led you into the place that you're at? Tell us about your stories. Tell us what's been going on. And they don't take the time to do that. They just focus on treating the symptom. And so many people are misdiagnosed or not even diagnosed at all. And from my experience, they don't even get any diagnosis.
I've got two kids that were misdiagnosed by the systems, and it's just mind numbing and frustrating, because as a parent, you're fighting the system. And I walked away with that, with the means I have. I mean, I do research for a living. So walking in to advocate for my two kids, and it was humbling to know that I could not advocate for my kids against a system that's set up the way you just said it was.
Mm.
And if I can't do it, think of all the people that are just at the mercy of somebody who wants to look a little bit behind the assessment, a little bit behind the paperwork that they have to fill out. There's just not, it's hard.
It's hard, and thank you for sharing that. I can see it's a really, really difficult, and it's so hard because you're fighting, you know, it almost feels like you're hitting a brick wall.
Right.
And
Well,
people don't want to listen because they've got stuck in their ways. And you know, we know Dr. Daniel Lehman, he loves to speak his mind, and so do I. But it's like, do you not read? You know, I've clients who have doctors who don't think there's a connection between your brain and your guts.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, how are you still, you know, you kind of think, how is this person still practicing?
Oh, I know. Well, it's kind of that old adage that, you know, the experts learn more and more about narrower and narrower topics until they know everything, absolutely everything about nothing. And so it's that specialization built-in structural problem. And, you know, and part of what has fueled, you know, my life story has fueled the research, knowing that I'm not unusual. Other people are experiencing the same thing, and going up against some of the conventional wisdom about, you know, the conventional wisdom that says wellness programs work or that people are disengaged. What we found with teachers is that even though Gallup says that 70% of teachers are disengaged, when we did our research, what we found, it was more like they were fatigued, battle weary, traumatized, depressed, overworked, and it looks like disengagement when you assess it.
Yeah, because they're living chronically stressed.
Right, right.
You know, is chronic stress at its worst because of the layers of pressure and the layers of trauma, like you mentioned earlier, the layers of trauma they're having to absorb from kids that come into the schools that are traumatized themselves and not getting the care. And so they then become the carers of children who haven't got the support structure perhaps at home, or they didn't get the support from the medical profession, or they're not getting it in a way that's appropriate to serve their needs. And it just becomes a huge burden on teachers, doesn't it?
And they weren't, that's not what they signed up for when they became teachers. You know, and the phrase we kept on hearing, kids are coming to school not ready to learn. So all that social and emotional learning that has to go on. And Dr. Gasco says we have to educate the autonomic nervous system before we can educate the brain. In other words, we've got to be able to control that stress balance response before you can take on cognitive load. And
absolutely, yeah.
Learning with stress, any kind of load, emotional load and cognitive load is registered as stress on the system.
Yeah, because you can't deal with it. Your you know, your reptilian brain is in the driving seat, which is your emotional centers of your brain, your amygdala and your deep limbic system, and then obviously you have your basal ganglia, your anxiety centers either side, and that's in the driving seat, and it won't activate the thinking part of your brain because it's in fight or flight mode, or freeze or defensive rage, whatever it happens to choose in that moment. And so there's no desire for it to turn logical thinking on, because that's not how we've been programmed as humans to survive. We've been put in this automatic response state. So we have to bring people into a safe haven and a safe space to allow people to thrive. And I really love the fact that you mentioned, you know, children come into the school or education system not ready to learn, because we had an earlier guest on, Charlie Smith, and he had serious adverse childhood experiences. His dad was really abusive, and a leader in the community, and what went on behind closed doors was very different to what was exhibited openly. And it's actually his mum said to him, the only way you're going to get out of this it is through education. And his father was actually in education, as a leader in the education space.
Wow.
And he was a really bad learner, because he was obviously, his fight or flight system was always on, and he really struggled to learn. But when he realized that his education and learning would be his get out, that would be his escape route, overnight, he said, he went from a really poor learner to an exceptional student. And I know this is that's single a cool story.
Yeah,
because his brain was able to say, okay, now this is my escape. This is how I'm going to get out. And he was obviously in flight, not fight. So he's in flight mode. So he was able to move forward by activating his prefrontal cortex and his learning centers.
That's a great story. You know, he was able to release a new story that he was able to live into.
Yeah. But so many kids aren't like that. And I'd love to explore your story for your kids, and also how it made you feel when you found the answer rather than the diagnosis.
It's interesting. So one, it answered a lot of questions, and it confirmed a lot of things that we thought and knew, and it gave us direction, you know. Now, when you've got adult children, it's one thing for you to know and for them to see, but you don't have as much influence on what they're going to actually do and follow up than you'd like. Now, I will say that, you know, Michelle is doing well. She's married, baby, you know, we've got our first grandchild. So she picked a great partner, someone who is as interesting as she is, you know, on the spectrum. They make a great pair, and together they really complete and reinforce each other. So it's fun to watch.
That's brilliant.
My oldest son, who went through his period in the last 2 years, he's really found himself, embraced who he is, embraced the hard period, recognizes the things he's got to watch out for, and he's thriving as well in terms of where he's at in terms of his career and his social life. And it's really improved the family relationships. So, and it was a long haul, you know, for my son. It was 8 years of working through from high school, the damage that happened in high school. And
they both had high school. Was it both bullying that they experienced during high school?
Well, for Michelle, it was bullying. For Nathan, it was with the ADD. It was just, this isn't working for me. And
the system didn't support his learning. The system didn't work.
So, you know, he found, now he's an Eagle Scout, but didn't graduate from high school because 3 months before he says, I'm out of here. This isn't working. And so he went through a hard journey to find his own place. And, you know, the stress on the family, all the things that you go through and trying to figure it out and trying to sort through cause, you know, was mom and dad to blame? Are we, you know, do I know who I am? Do I even fit in this family, you know, with adopted children? All that stuff we just had to go through. And the only way Lisa and I really coped is said, we're in this for the long term. You know, this is not a fast, whatever it is, we just keep showing up and be supportive. And you learn a lot about what boundaries are. You learn a lot about how to handle other people's challenges. We just went through a lot of learning through the process. And
go on, carry on.
I was going to say, and so we saw turning points in each of it, but I'm not in a position that if somebody else is going through it to be able to say, here's what works and here's what doesn't work, because we just had to figure it out as we went.
I mean, the journey's different for everyone, isn't it? Because it's a
It is.
unique journey, just like
It
you're
is.
unique.
Uh-huh.
Everyone has a unique brain, and we all have to figure out how to get the best out of it. I'd be really interested to know, what was the biggest challenge for you on the journey? Because I know obviously both your kids have been misdiagnosed. What was the biggest challenge to know the truth so it could
Yeah.
set them free?
Well, so with Michelle, it was that she kind of owned the identity of having MS. Once she got
Right,
diagnosed, that became part of her identity. Now, it was when she got married, was I saw a window of an opportunity because she had to go in as to maybe we can change her story. And that's when I said, take your brain scans in and see. But until then, we weren't making any progress in terms of lifestyle changes or, recognizing the recommendations that the Amen Clinic had. So that was the hardest part, is changing, her being willing to accept a new story about who she was.
wow,
And so for Nathan, the breakthrough for him was getting some confidence and success in one thing. And once he experienced that, it kind of unlocked everything. So that was kind of the key for him.
And was he aware he had ADD, or was this another
Oh, yes.
misdiagnosis?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. He was the kid in middle school where we knew he had done the homework, and the school would call and Lisa would have to go up and find his work either in his locker or in his backpack or shoved into his desk or whatever it was. Um, Yep. He would be the kid where I'd say, "Hey, can you take out the trash?" And in between the kitchen and wherever the front door was, that got lost. And so, um, but his gifts and strengths are he's extremely gifted in emotional intelligence, reads people extremely well, and is very in the moment, and
Wow.
very different than me. I mean, very different than me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And if you like, obviously you're a parent, you've been through that storm and you're coming
Yeah,
out of the other side, but what would your advice be to you personally? Now that you've been there, what would
right.
you say to your younger parent self that's starting the journey? What would you say to you as a younger person?
Well, first is trust your gut. Don't wait for the system to tell you what they think,
Hmm.
because we probably lost a year or two doing that
Wow.
in the because you have to go through assessments, and then you got to sit and go through all the meetings, you got to check the dots, and then if you disagree, then you've got to escalate and all of that. If you lose 2 years in middle school, it's over. That's it. You just don't have the luxury. So what I found is that grade school was great, elementary school. Middle school is what I call the great calling out. That's where the social skills kick in. That's where the real academics kick in. And
Hmm.
that's when it really separates. The other thing I would have done earlier is I'm an expert on the Strengths Finder or Clifton Strengths.
Yeah.
I've done more than 17,000, and
I
you know
know you did mine and it was very insightful.
so there's a middle school version of that. I would have done
Right,
that earlier to understand the unique wiring of my kids and play to their strengths.
right.
But even before that, what I would recommend for every parent is read some of Ken Robinson's books, uh, because everybody is born with a unique, original genius spark, a factor that only you
Mhm.
have. And Maslow tells us that the things that we can become, we have a compulsion that we must become to find fulfillment. So, what Ken Robinson's case is, and there's research from NASA, is that school kills that original genius spark. We lose our instincts. We don't trust it because we're in a system that makes us conform and that focuses on what's wrong instead of what's strong.
And it almost brings in doubt, doesn't it? So, right, that intuition that you would go
Yes.
forward with, it introduces the doubt of your intuition. So you you
All of that.
you start to trust it less.
Yeah,
And
because you want
actually,
to fit in, you want to be right, you
yeah,
don't want to look stupid. So all those things that you spontaneously just did, sing out of key when you're 3 to 5 years old,
yeah,
don't know the lyrics, doesn't matter. All that begins to disappear. And the the assessment that George Land created for NASA, he gave it to 1,600 preschoolers, and
wow,
98% tested as geniuses. But by age 15, it had dropped to 12%. By age 30, it dropped to 2%. And and so part of our work and my mission is to help people recover a map that that points out where your genius potential lays, do the archaeology work of getting rid of the rubble that has covered it up, and help you rebuild that original, those things you naturally do best and enjoy most, that you don't trust at a gut level. Now,
yeah.
it's, you know, you've got, there's skills and things you have to learn to have that confidence. We all have it. Only 2% of us actually live into that potential.
Yeah. Wow. And what would you recommend as the top book for people to read? That you mentioned Ken Robinson's books. Which one would you recommend people to read
Well,
as a
the,
starter?
the Strengths Finder 2.0, and take the assessment to
Uh-huh.
find out what you naturally do best and enjoy most, and just see how many things am I doing really tap and let me do that. And then I've got a book coming out in March called The Genius Spark, which really goes more into connecting the dots between that original genius we had, and then how do you recover and find that again. I would start with those two books. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you've got kids in school, Ken Robinson's books are essential, so you can be a good advocate. If you're
Mm-hmm.
out of school, then the Strength Finder 2.0 helps you get on the journey.
Brilliant.
And I would recommend those.
And had you had the opportunity to read those with your kids, or did you end up, were like your discovery journey when you were going through this research that you were
Yeah,
asked to do, and
so
actually it
it was
played
more of
into your
my, I
family's
discovered it
strengths?
for research. Yeah, I discovered it in research, and my
Uh-huh.
kids were beyond. They were beyond the stage of listening to dad teach them things.
Uh-huh. And what was your, as your family went through, and your daughter, obviously she's now married, she's got an amazing, you've got an amazing is it
Grandson,
grandson?
Gwydion. Gwydion is his name.
Brilliant, lovely.
It's Welsh.
And what did what was your big learning point as a parent in this whole journey that you went through? What was your biggest learning point?
To continue to reinforce what they naturally do well and enjoy, to just encourage and reinforce, to focus on what's strong. And as an early parent, I focused on the opposite. I focused on what
Wow.
was wrong, trying to fix what, improve. If you want to put a charitable interpretation, it's how do I help them improve? But it was really, fixing things that I wanted to fix instead of focusing on what they already do well.
What they did well. So rather than you're trying to create them into something that perhaps they weren't, and not tapping into their authentic
Yeah, right.
skill set.
Yep.
So I'd love to dive into the fun facts quiz, because I think this is a
Sure.
great
Absolutely.
point
Okay.
to dive into areas of your life that maybe you didn't do so well.
Yeah, I'm
But it's
going to brace.
okay, because
I'll
we
brace
all.
myself. Yeah, I'll brace myself.
So fun facts is looking at the 5 pillars of brain health in a fun way. So first of all, feelings. What's the funniest or most embarrassing thing, and you may even not even have told your kids this, that has ever happened to you?
Probably the most embarrassing thing is I mistakenly went into the women's bathroom and in a conference,
Oh,
and I started seeing these high heels coming in, and I just sat for a long time until
Were you in a cubicle at the
I
time?
was in the cubicle at the time, and I just kind of hushed and stayed quiet and tried to sneak out.
Did you make it out
I did.
without
I made
being?
it out. I
You
made it
did
out. I
without
don't
being
know if the
noticed.
cameras captured it, but I made it out.
What's the actions? This is the second pillar. Actions. What's the craziest thing you've ever done?
Bought this ranch that we now own. I'm 67 years old, and we bought a 15-acre historical property, a ranch, to turn into a leadership center. I don't know what we were thinking, but my wife misinterpreted a curiosity comment as an interest comment, and now we're here building it out and got clients coming in March. So that's the craziest thing.
Well, I think that's really exciting, and you only live once, so if you don't pursue what you're passionate about, then
Right.
you're not fulfilling something that's meaningful in your life. So I think I'm really excited for you in your new ranch. Connection is the third pillar. Connection to yourself. What's the most important value for you that guides you in life?
Well, my faith in Christ. I find that the ability to kind of start fresh every day,
Yeah.
and to look at what I'm grateful for, and to recognize that whatever success I've got, I didn't do it by myself. That's really a guiding principle for me, is to always remember that the people in my network, my family, and all of the things that have gotten me to where I'm at.
Wow. And do you think that's so important, that is we can fail alone, but we can't succeed alone? Is we need people to help us succeed. Yes. Connection to others. Who's been your role model?
My dad has been a big role model for me. He's been a key part of just kind of his courage, his willingness to accept others. I've got high school friends and people who come back to me and said he was the first adult that actually treated them like they were worth talking to.
Oh, wow. That's a brilliant role model to have, that
Yeah.
he showed that level of respect to the, and I think that's such an important piece that we kind of are starting to miss in certain parts of society, is this respect between the young and the old, and it goes both ways.
Right.
And I think that's a beautiful role model to have in your life, particularly the courage piece to do what he knows is right. What's for your thoughts, what's the stupid or crazy thought you've often told yourself in the past that isn't true?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, well, it's actually, I've achieved several international awards and an author, and I just keep thinking I guess it's the imposter thing, that, there's no way I could have done this or accomplished what I've accomplished. And so that's the thing that stands in the back, that I'm more of a background person than a front stage person. And probably I've got enough life experience, research, and knowledge that I could probably step up more.
Do you ever celebrate your successes?
I don't. Yeah, I don't.
How would you celebrate them? Because a lot of people, I've had an award from the past, and they kind of, sometimes they go on the shelf, or they don't even appear on the shelf because you don't really believe in them, so they kind of get pushed out of the way. What was the last award you received? Do you remember?
Well, several. Yeah, so I received kind of the author of the year for the International Facility Managers Award. I received the Corporate Real Estate Network's Global Innovator Award. That's their top award. I have achieved their Industry Excellence Award. Those are their top two awards.
Wow.
I'm probably one of few people who've actually received 3 of those kinds of established awards. Um, and I'm wired basically that, okay, check that off the list. Now what's next? Getting a book published and getting recognition. I mean, that's a male version of birthing a child in terms of pain and agony. And
I have
it's
to say, I'm not sure women would quite agree from a pain.
I'm sure that's the case, but that's the closest I can come. And it's kind of like I promised myself I'm never going to do it again, and then about 2 years later, it's kind of like, okay, let's try another one.
And I know we talked right at the beginning. You talked about time and taking time. So, would you ever take time out to just pause and reflect and acknowledge?
I do now. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's been kind of the breakthrough since 2016. I wear a Whoop strap and an Aura ring. And so recovery and pacing myself. I'll take a nap most days, 20-minute nap. That's kind of a new, the last 4 years. So appreciating that high performance is really being able to channel your best energy at specific periods instead of trying to handle the day as a marathon. I handle it in kind of a series of sprints. And I really do take a break in between, after this call, I'll take a break and
reflect and just go
reflect or take a walk or, do something. Yeah.
Great. And I know we talked about this when we last spoke, is surroundings. What's the most beautiful place you've ever visited?
Oh my
and
gosh.
what makes it so special?
Probably Nicoya in Costa Rica. It was kind of a jungle paradise.
Wow.
And then secondly, the ranch. I mean,
Uh-huh.
one of the things I love, 3 or 4 times a week when it's quiet, I'll go down to the creek
Yeah.
and it's surrounded by large limestone bluffs. You're just away from the world, and it's my private place to just go walk and think and reflect.
Wow. And I think, we don't, and this leads right into a lot of the work that you've done, is we don't take that time, do we?
No.
To think about how important our surroundings are. And I'm not just talking about the physical surroundings, but I'm talking about the surroundings in terms of the people, the culture, the energy that people bring into the space, the environment, the physical environment, the digital environment, how that totally influences our brain health and whole well-being.
Right.
What have you, since 2006, know you've been on a journey and you've written quite a few books. What's been your biggest sort of discovery or finding in that journey?
Well, the biggest aha is that the assumptions I had going in were completely wrong. For example, we went into assuming that 70% of teachers were disengaged, and then it's not disengagement. How many teachers do you know who really don't care about kids, but they're worn out? And so the industry, the other one too, is that I assume that wellness programs work. I mean, it's a $4.3 trillion industry. Somebody smarter than me must know that they work. And so when we began to write the book, The Healthy Workplace Nudge, and I had 150 different experts, industry experts and leaders, and we began to look at how environments can improve or help wellness programs, the first thing we had to ask is, what's a wellness program? What's it supposed to accomplish, and how well does it do it? When we got into it, the numbers just aren't there. Wellness programs just don't work. They don't make people healthier. They don't reduce costs. Now, you got to read the book to understand why. So what I found is that things that are stuck for a long time, usually we're asking the wrong questions. And so the process I created gives me the opportunity to tackle something that we think we know where to start, but the process allows us to get into it and just back up and say, okay, what we thought we were tackling is not the real issue. Are we willing to go after something different? And that's been kind of my biggest discovery.
And that massively ties into your personal journey, doesn't it? You know, with your family, is you've said exactly that, is what you were tackling.
Yeah.
Was very different to what you were being told was going on in your, you know, in your family's brain function perspective. And how, you know, what the best way was to help them through that storm and out of the other side was probably, I imagine, quite different to the approach that you were
100%.
taking.
Well, and I'm okay. I'm comfortable. You know, the assets I bring into the research is I'm not the subject matter expert. I have a naive look at it. I can look at the lens of common sense, and I'm okay with not being right. The other part of it too is all my books tend to become like a method actor, you know, an actor who actually takes on the role. So my family has been sucked into these research projects and they laugh at it because, you know, they're the guinea pigs of the research.
We'll see if mine's the same.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I think it's important, isn't it, that, and we talked about this right at the beginning, is that people can get so narrow-minded and so specialist that they end up becoming a specialist of nothing that's actually going to help anybody. And actually, it's really important that we keep that open mind, especially, you know, I'm a scientist from background, and, you know, there's often these scientific jostles or fights or, you know, disagreements because you've got a closed-minded culture where it's, well, this is my theory. Well, this is my theory. And never the twain shall meet, and nobody can have a sensible discussion about it. And the fact that you can, because you're not sucked into that state, it is incredibly powerful. And you've demonstrated that for your family as well, that, you know, having that open mind and that perspective that you bring, and obviously leveraging your strengths that you know very deeply, has been a huge asset to everyone around you, and obviously to the wider world, with all of the research that you've done and the insights that you've brought from doing the research, and the right research, and not assuming that your assumptions were correct.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I'd like to claim that the research was well targeted, planned ahead of time, but it's kind of like I bring people together who have a common frustration and a common problem, and we say, okay, what do we want to do? And it all starts there. And I love it. It's, you know, I'm wired to learn and to research, so it's kind of my personal learning lab.
Yeah. And I know we're getting to the end of time, so it's been a fascinating discussion. But
absolutely.
As a parent, obviously you've been on this brain health journey to helping your kids really unchain their pain.
Yeah.
What one piece of advice would you give a parent who's intuitively knows that something is not right? What would your advice be to a parent who has children that's struggling?
Yeah, well, to be there with them, don't try to fix it, and to be a safe place, and recognize that you may hear some things or discover some things that you have to manage your anxiety over it, and you can't want them to have something because you want them to have it. You've just got to go along with the journey. So it's kind of, instead of being the hero to your child, be the guide, you know. Let your child be the hero, and be the servant guide that'll come alongside and help them discover their own journey in the process.
Wow. Do you know, thank you. That's such beautiful advice, because I think, you know, that guide analogy is so important. Is our kids have got to walk the journey of life themselves, haven't they?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we can't walk it for them.
Yep.
And they've got to make the decisions on that road, but we obviously can guide them on the right path, but ultimately they've got to do the walking.
Yeah. But 100% of my instincts is I could fix it for them. I could help them. And that instinct just gets in the way.
Yeah. It's like the teacher analogy, isn't it? Like they carry the load, they end up carrying hundreds of students on their back.
Yeah. Right.
And then ultimately, they're walking up this really hefty hill, and ultimately they're starting to collapse under the weight of the load, because the kids aren't able to, maybe the teachers don't have the tools to help the kids walk it themselves and to be the guide. So they end up just carrying everybody.
Right.
And it's really hard. Thank you
so
you're
welcome.
much,
Thank
Rex.
you. Yeah.
So how can people get hold of you? What's the best way? And I know you've mentioned a lot of books. We'll put all of those in the show notes, so they'll be included.
Well, so there's 3 ways. LinkedIn, I would love for people to connect because I post content almost every day. And things we're learning. My website is rexmiller.com, www.rexmiller.com. And that's also my email, rex@rexmiller.com. 3 ways you can connect. And, I look forward to hearing from your audience.
Yeah. And, and I think everybody should really make sure you get hold of Rex's books. They are really amazing. I love the insightful stories that you've brought into your books.
Thank you.
And just how it's really shifted the perspective of what people have done. And you've mentioned this on the show as well, is not going in with a closed mindset, but really an open mindset about how you can change things.
Yeah.
That's so important. Rex, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. If there's anything I can do to support you in your mission, I'd love to have you back when your book launches.
Yeah, nice.
That would be amazing, back on the show to talk about that.
And in the future, we'll have to share brain scans.
Yeah. I'm really, I'd love to see what you will have to connect offline and
yeah.
Yeah.
The good news is there's one there. That's the good news.
So Rex, thank you everyone.
Yeah,
This is
welcome.
the show is Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain. You're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better, and we're here to help show you how. Thank you, Rex.
Yeah, you're welcome.
To you by WINJECT Studios. We are an all-in-one educational platform for podcasters that revolutionizes how hosts leverage content to increase engagement with listeners, downloads, and income. We come together to focus on community, collaboration, and collective impact. For more information on how you can interact directly with our hosts, access exclusive live content with offers you can't get anywhere else from our official partners, join our purpose-driven community by visiting www.winject.com. If you're ready to build a career doing what you love, then we're ready to see you there.